midlife crisis isn't a crisis, it's a transition.
Right.
And we keep using that word crisis, which who would want that? Who would even want midlife if you think here comes a crisis?
Right.
But midlife is a transition period.
Yeah. Hi, friend. Welcome to the Big 4-0. I'm Stephanie McLaughlin. This is the place where we talk about a midlife turning point no one warned you about. The very normal, often messy, always meaningful experience of transition sometime around age 40. For many of us, it's the first time we realize the life we built in our 20s and 30s doesn't quite fit anymore. The job, the relationships, even the goals we once chased start to feel off. I know that feeling well. I fought against it hard and honestly made the whole thing messier than it had to be. On this show, we talk about what happens next, how people navigate change, redefine success, and build lives that actually feel like their own. I share stories and conversations that help you make sense of what might be shifting in your life and remind you that you're not the only one figuring it out. Today, my guest is Dr. Deborah Heiser, a psychologist whose research on aging and emotional development helped her reimagine her own life at midlife. She joins me to talk about why this chapter can be the most liberating one yet. Hi, Deborah. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
I am so excited to talk to you today. And I say that with almost every person I talk to, but my notes from our conversation say, have her on to nerd out about transition, which is what we're going to do tonight. Because you are actually a midlife specialist, right? I mean, this is your area of expertise. And so when you reached out to me, I was like, holy cow, this is meant to be. You and I are meant to be friends.
I love midlife, and I'm so excited that you do.
Yeah. Well, let's jump in and start with a little bit of your story. So tell me a little bit about, I know you have a transition at 4-0. So tell me a little bit about who you were when that transition began and then what that transition looked like.
Sure. So I was a researcher, and I researched everything no one wants to have or get. And I had a pivotal moment that really was beginning in my 30s. But by the time I was 40, I had the courage to make the pivot. And that pivot really was to say, I am going to move away from what I'm doing, which was having a secure, well-paying job in research, and to actually move and pivot. It was like throwing all of that away in a way.
Yeah.
And completely moving to something new. And I remember at the time, I thought to myself, I don't even care if I don't have a safety net. I'm going to finally do what I want to do. I felt like I can do this.
Yeah.
And it really took until I was 40 to feel like I can do this and actually feel like I could do it.
Yeah.
So what I did was I moved and I pivoted to look at what we have to look forward to. And I had been building on that beforehand and learning a little bit about it, but I never made the big transition and was still continuing to research all the things that no one wants to have or get by the end of life. So when I did make that pivot to what we're looking at that's positive in life, I started to hang out with new friends. I started to do new things. I was engaged in all sorts of things that I had not ever done before, including things that I was really afraid of. Things like public speaking, things like moving out and doing different kinds of blog work, joining organizations that had you be a little bit more present. And that was because I made that transition and then finally felt the confidence. Like, why was I hiding?
Yeah.
Why was I behind a screen with all of this? So it was really around 42 that the pivot really happened. And I have never looked back since. It's really kind of amazing. I still do all of the things, the writing and everything else, but it's just different. I have a whole different feel about it.
Yeah. It's so funny. You said a couple of things there about the safety net and not caring about the safety net. So I started my business when I was 36, and I started it a little bit, I've told the story before, but a little bit by accident. I thought I was going to go find a new job, but instead I took on some freelance work in the meantime. And after about 6 months, it was like, oh, hey, wait, maybe I can do this. And the interesting thing to me at that point was, so I was single and I had within a year or two prior bought a condo, but it was very affordable. And I thought, well, I just need to make like $2,500 a month in order to cover my condo and some bills. And I could go eat at my parents' house if I had to. And I remember thinking to myself, the tightrope is really low to the ground. Like, I actually
Yeah.
don't have far to fall.
That's
And
how I felt.
yeah.
That's exactly how I felt.
And I thought, well, and if the absolute worst happened and I screwed up so badly that I lost my home, I'd go move in with my parents. Like, again, I thought of like the very, very, very worst case
Yeah.
scenarios. And I was like, it's not the worst thing in the world. So it's interesting that you talk about not caring about the safety net because I thought I didn't need one because my bar was so low that I was like, "Ah, I'm not.
Mhm.
And I feel like over time it has inclined up little by little so that by
Yeah.
the time you're way up in the air, you're really accustomed to being on the bar or on the wire. And it's like, no, this is
Yes.
just where I live.
Exactly. You're
Yeah.
so right. That's so well put because, at that point, I said to myself, well, I can just go get another job. Even if I
Yes.
don't love that other job, I'll go get another job that is going to be what I know is safe. And so I always had that as my backup. Will I work? I'll go to Walmart if I have to. I will work anywhere if I
Right.
have to.
Right.
And so I put that in my mind that I didn't need to go and be a director of research someplace. I could do what I want to do. And even if something drastic happened and I needed to fill in with a part-time something or other,
Yeah.
I'll find it.
Yeah.
And that set me free like I'd never felt free before. And the 40s really allowed me to see that I had expertise, that I actually had value, that if somebody wanted to hire me, they were lucky to get me because I knew what I was doing.
Oh my God.
So I
Yes.
realized at that moment that I wasn't struggling like I was in my early 30s, where I was the newbie and I didn't know when I started out. And I was like, my goodness, I'm the expert here.
Yeah.
Oh, who, me?
Yeah.
I didn't feel like that anymore. I was like, I'm the expert here. And that shift in mindset made it for me.
Yeah, I had a very, very similar experience. So maybe 6 or 8 months before my last full-time job ended badly with me walking to the door with an escort, which we all know what that means. I had sort of thought like, "Oh, could I ever start my own business?" And I thought to myself, I have no idea what I have that I could sell. I could never figure out that I had skills or talents that people would pay for. And again, this is almost 20 years ago. So early on in the everybody can hang a shingle era of our world.
Yeah.
But after I had decided, yes, this is what I'm going to do, like I'm getting good feedback for my freelance work and I can turn this into a real thing. I remember going to a community event, it was some trade show type thing, and seeing lots of people that I knew. And I remember walking up to somebody and saying, "Hey, Jeff, guess what? I'm starting my own communications business." And he said to me, "You mean I can get you now?" And my
Oh,
jaw dropped because he couldn't afford a full-time me, but he
yeah.
could afford a part-time me, and god damn it, he wanted my experience, and that it was like he valued this experience that I was bringing to the table more than I did at the time. I hadn't shifted to really understand what that
Yeah.
expertise was and what that value was, and it is interesting that shift that takes place in your mindset around that time when you become the expert. You become I remember one of my
Mhm.
uncles saying years I was a teenager or something, and I remember him talking to my dad, and they're wise asses, but I remember him saying, "Hey, I'm the talent." And I was like, "Oh,
And
I get it now."
yeah, exactly.
You know what? He was a wise ass, but he was right.
Yes. It's when you finally get to take ownership.
Yeah.
And I really think that's also the time that I started to look at life as a pie. And everyone always made me feel beforehand, or I shouldn't say anyone made me feel, I made myself feel
Mhm.
like I had to have one job. I had one, I think, to identify with
Mhm.
early on. And that was my job. Well, why do you have to have a one?
Right?
Why can't you be doing several things? So branching out and doing several things made me realize I I am doing more than I've ever done before, but I feel more alive. I
Yeah.
wasn't, in the workplace and saying, okay, I'm here from this hour to this hour every day, and this is who I am. I got to be several slices of a pie, and that could be however I wanted to arrange that. And that was also liberating. I think that in transition, people think you have to move from one big thing to another. It's one pie to another pie.
Right. You have to jump
And
flavors completely.
exactly,
Yeah.
like you're going from pumpkin to pecan and
Right.
that's it.
Right.
You're a whole different it's just a different pie.
Yeah.
But you can have one of those I love those cheesecakes that has like 14 different flavors or 12 different flavors.
Right. Right.
You can do that as
Yeah.
much as you want or as little as you want. And that's such a cool thing with transitions is that you get to choose how much and how little you wanna do it.
Yeah. So, when did your interest in, curiosity about, intrigue by this midlife portion of our lives come to you? Was it about this time during this transition, or was it a little bit later?
It was actually a little bit earlier.
A little
So
bit
what
earlier.
happened was I was studying and researching and wrote a book on end of life and all of these things that happen like Alzheimer's and frailty and depression. And I was not the life of a party. So I happened to have evidence of that. I went to a party and I truly was sitting there thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I can't wait to tell everybody what I do. I'm so thrilled with myself. I can't wait. And I'm at the party and it comes to me, I'm like, "Ah," and I tell everyone and it falls flat. Like looking back, I think, what was I thinking? And so the person across from me was like, the place is like silent. You could hear like crickets. And the
Yeah.
guy across from me said, so what do we have to look forward to? It sounds like you're putting a band-aid on all the horrible things that we have to look forward to.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. And so that was the moment that I started to pivot, but it's not like you can pivot and then say, "Oh, now I'm going to look at everything we have to look forward to."
Right.
I had to learn it. I had to research it. I had to get into it.
Yeah.
And that took a few years.
Sure.
And that's when I realized that we have an emotional trajectory that we don't think about. We think of our physical trajectory, and of course that ends in a way that nobody is looking forward to.
Right.
But when we think of our emotional trajectory, it starts at the same place at birth and it goes up and it never goes down. And I
Mm.
was like, you know what? When we're little, when people have children, they don't say, oh, I want my child to grow up and run fast. They say, I want my child to grow up and be happy.
Yeah.
But we lose that along the way.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, let me see what that is. And then in midlife, like at 40, but definitely by 50, you should have this emotional sort of epiphany stage where you say, okay, I'm an expert and I want to give back.
Yeah.
I've been filling my jar this whole time
Yeah.
with stuff. Now I want to open the lid and let it out.
Yeah.
And that got me. And I said, I can't believe that this isn't making it out to the masses, that nobody's talking about this. So everybody was talking about all the doom and gloom things. And nobody was talking about how we should be happier and how there's literal research showing that in the developmental milestones that we go through support it all. So
Yeah.
that was really the moment that it was before I turned 40. So by the time I turned 40, I was ready. I got it. It made sense to me.
So you said something about the emotional arc, which is so interesting because we all, I think, if we think about aging, we think about the physical arc, which is much more of a bell curve, right? We grow up and we're strong and vibrant. And then it's around 40 that it's like, oh, I need reading glasses. I'm like, oh, I can't hold my liquor as much, or there's all these things. I can't stand up for as long, or these little tiny things. My knees hurt, my lower back hurts.
Yeah.
And so we always think of aging as this breakdown, as you're cresting the top of that bell curve
Yeah.
and starting down the other side. And so I think a lot of people kind of view that as a loss of youth. And we definitely see people grasping for it in certain
Mhm.
ways. But I love this concept of the emotional curve being a completely different shape.
Yeah, it's just a line that goes up, a diagonal line that goes up. The other one is almost like an inverted V. We have a very steep incline going up early on in life, but it's way before 40. It's not until we hit 40 that we start to see those changes.
Okay.
But, when you're 30, you can't run as fast as you could when you were 15.
Right.
There are those subtle things, but we all think aging means we're going to one day notice. We're going to wake up and we're going to be like, I'm frail. How'd
Right.
that happen? It's all very subtle. Nobody really feels the aging process or the decline. Like, I don't sit around and say, oh, I wish I could run faster.
Yeah.
Bummer. I don't even care that I wear reading glasses, but I always tell my students, you can outrun me, but I'm happier than you.
I was just looking
I
for
don't,
that note in my notes. I remember you saying that.
that's true.
Go ahead and run fast, child. Go ahead.
It's me. And I'm going to just happily stand back here and
Yeah.
enjoy life.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. The other thing that you mentioned to me when we first spoke was I like to focus on this transition around sometime around age 40. And you and I connected on the fact that the sort of underpinning framework and thesis for what I'm doing is the book Passages by Gail Sheehy. I
Yeah.
talk about it very regularly. And the background to that book is that she sort of said between conception and age like 18, 19, 20, whenever you leave the house, there is all this information on what to expect and different stages and growth spurts and evolutions but then at 20 you must be fully formed and a quote unquote adult and off you go. And her contention was that's actually not true. There are
Right.
again still predictable stages of development that we go through.
Mhm.
And the one that I've always been interested in is this 35 to 45-ish.
Yeah.
And you said two things to me when we first spoke, jumping off from that is one, we're constantly going through transitions. It's not like 35 to
Yeah.
45 and you're done.
Then you go through more.
Right. And then two, Gail's book came out in, I think, the mid 70s.
Mhm.
And life isn't quite as linear anymore. We're not all going through the same cultural things on the same timeline anymore, right? You leave your house and you go to college and you get married and you have kids and right? And I'm a perfect example of that. I left college and screwed around for a bunch of years and finally met my husband at 40 and we didn't have kids and started a business at
Mhm.
36. It's not quite as linear anymore. So that's an interesting thing to understand too, is that even though I'm interested in this, the big 40 and how our life changes around that, it changes a lot constantly.
Yeah. Oh, all the time. It's starting from birth. I mean, you can see the things that we go through, and if
Right.
you can go back to when you were a kid, transitions were happening all the time. One day you're talking, and the next day you're not. Or one day you're not, and the next day you are.
Right.
We're transitioning all the time. And what happens is those physical transitions end up being more background, and the emotional transitions become more foreground
Mm.
as we get older. So puberty, huge physical transformations are
Right.
happening. That's a transition that we can all relate to. Would anybody want to go back to that? Probably not.
Right.
That is a time that when we say, oh, transitions in midlife and later, I'm nervous about that. Well, look back to when you were 12.
Right.
That was a pretty rocky time.
Right.
So what happens is by the time we hit midlife, the other thing that happens is we are moving into a much more advanced world in terms of technology and things like that, and our expectations are different.
Yeah.
So you said, "Oh, I married at 40 and I didn't have children." That's all completely normal. Like
Right.
that
Right.
wasn't a while back, like when she wrote that book.
Right.
That's because women weren't primarily able to hold down a household. I remember in the 80s getting a credit card and they wanted, no, it was like 1990 even. I wanted to get like a Macy's credit card or something. And they made me use my husband's name and I had kept my name.
Right.
And they didn't wanna give me one on my own, and I thought,
Yeah.
"Are you kidding me?" So our world has really changed.
Yeah.
That is not a long time ago.
No.
So if we think about the way that we've changed and women may never marry, they may never have children, that is a new accepted thing, and that wasn't back when she wrote the book. So
Right.
now that we have tech as well, that's another way that we are using that for transitions much differently. We can remain connected. We can have jobs that are global. We can say, I'm going to go work from Italy
Yeah.
and my job is in New Jersey in many cases. So our worlds are changing, which allows our transitions to be a lot more fluid than they were before. And we have a lot more freedom from others who are accepting of our transitions the way we choose to make them.
That's interesting, freedom. Because one of the things that I think happens during this period, this phase of our life, is that, and again, I'm leaning on Gail Sheehy here, but it has proven true through the 120-ish interviews I've done so far. So people go from relying on and taking advice from other people, right? Our parents, our bosses, our teachers, our mentors, whoever. They are older and wiser than us. They know better than us. And so they must have the answer. And so we follow the path that they set out, whether it's explicitly or implicitly. And that's what we wake up to in our 30s or 40s and realize it doesn't fit. It doesn't feel good. I don't know how I got here. This isn't my life. I don't feel fulfilled. And that's another word we'll get to in a couple of minutes. But then understanding that you have your own experience and you are a good enough authority to decide what is good for your life. And to me, that has proven very strongly to be a consistent theme among the folks that I've talked to.
And it's wonderful to hear that, because aging was the Wild West. Still kind of is. I mean, we then started to talk about aging, but it was the way that I was talking about it, look at all the doom and gloom. Then midlife was not talked about. So that's when I started to talk about midlife. People were like, what about it? They called it the sandwich generation, and nobody could think of anything else to do with midlife.
Right.
When you say fulfilled, that's an emotional category here. We never attached that to it. It was, how are you doing financially? Are you set up for retirement?
Right.
How much money do you have? That was all that we had to look at. So we are shaping how this looks, because now we have this new way to move forward. If you look at just a few decades back, everyone had to worry about, do I have Social Security? Is that going to cover me?
Right.
What are my payments looking like? Then it was, do I have a 401k? Do I have $5 million in the bank for retirement? And then people who didn't were like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do?
Right.
That has changed. That is not the narrative anymore. The narrative now is, how do you want to spend your time?
Yes.
And that may be work.
Right.
That may be part-time work. That may be changing where you live. That may be doing something different. There are so many options now. And that's where the freedom is. We don't have to say, oh my gosh, I have to work until X age, worry about Social Security, and do I have enough money in the bank? Should you worry about those things? You should think about them.
Right.
But you should also think, I will be viable and able to live a lifestyle that I want. And it may include work, but it'll be the work I choose to do until as long as I want to.
Right.
And that's how we should be thinking. And we are.
Right.
We're all doing that.
Right. Hi. We'll get back to the conversation in just a moment. The Big 4-0 doesn't stop when this episode ends. I've put together an email series that's like a companion guide to this midlife terrain. Stories, reflections, and prompts that help you make sense of your own transition, wherever you may be in that process. It's warm, honest, and practical, and you can consider it a note from a friend who's walked the same path and has some pretty gooey insights to share. Get that companion guide at thebig40.com. Click subscribe right in that main navigation. All right, back to the show. I think going back to fulfillment, that's another thing that happens at midlife. And you talked about it yourself. I backed into it, didn't realize it, but backed into it, is a lot of times you hear about career changes at midlife. And I remember clearly a conversation with a woman who climbed the corporate ladder and did all the things and checked all the boxes and was in the corporate boardroom, the actual pinnacle of what she set out to do. And a meeting let out and she was the last one in the room and she started crying because she was like, what is going on? What am I doing here? Is this what I worked so hard for?
Yeah.
And so we finally realized that fulfillment actually is important. And so we can then shift, whether it's changing the flavor of the pie we're working on, or whether it's, to your point, adapting the pie to be a little bit more friendly to what we want. But really, that fulfillment issue is something that we start to believe we deserve or we've earned.
Yes, and that we can talk about.
Yeah.
Decades ago, it was, and you're talking about the 70s, right? Fulfillment was not a part of our conversation.
No.
That was like for somebody that was just so self-involved.
Yes.
What, you're looking for fulfillment? Are you kidding me? Just stay in your job and do what you're supposed to do.
Right.
Who makes you think that you deserve fulfillment? We're just cranking it out.
Yeah.
And that's where we said, no, 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 along the way. Like Gen Xers really started the movement of saying, no, I am not going to stay in a job for the rest of my life and feel miserable just knowing that I'm putting enough money in the bank so that I can live a very modest lifestyle
Yeah.
that I'm still living now, but still unfulfilled.
Right.
That is where I think that there was a whole movement of people who said, that's it. I am going to put balance into my life. I'm going to make sure that I get to do the things that I enjoy.
Yeah.
And if that means moving to a different kind of job that was socially acceptable and appropriate when I was younger, or that I felt like I would be a failure if I didn't stay in that, people started to say, no, 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 I'm going to do whatever I want.
And that's why they called us slackers,
Exactly.
because we weren't fitting in their model.
It's so funny because every generation does that. The greatest generation thought the boomers were like slackers and losers. The
Right.
boomers think that Gen X is a bunch of slackers and losers, and the millennials get it. We pass that one down.
Right.
But really, each generation is becoming more emotionally evolved and saying, this is what I want. And we keep thinking that the younger generation is just entitled. And that's really, they're just entitled to feel their emotions.
Right.
I feel that's really the case. In each generation, we're learning it a little bit more.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but it doesn't feel good when you're hearing it from another generation that you're a slacker.
Right. You're hearing it from the quote unquote adults.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's harsh. That's hard.
It is. It is. It was.
I know. I felt it. It stings.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah. And I think I did the opposite of it, which was, work, 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 hard, hard, hard. Don't get called that. Don't get called that. I think I did everything I could to not get painted with that brush, which I don't think served me either.
Yes. That's what I did too. That's why when I went to that dinner, I was all excited. Oh, I can't wait for these people to hear what I'm going to say. And then I was like, oh no.
Right.
And that was a pivotal moment for me. It might not have been if I didn't care what other people were thinking, but I did.
Right.
I
Right.
valued their opinions about my work and what I was doing. And then I thought, oh my gosh, what? I have to start at the ground level again and learn all the way back up to see what this whole aging thing is. It's not just one side of the coin.
Yeah. Yeah. So here's another piece. So you and I are both Gen X, and the folks who are turning 40 now are squarely in the millennial generation and will be for the next 10 or however many years. The millennials will be turning 40. And so they're doing it a little bit differently than we did, which is great. I've said this over and over again, because it's the millennials, my podcast actually has a place, because if I had done it when you and I were turning 40, us Gen X, we do things on our own and we don't talk to anybody and we don't we don't go looking for support, right? Yeah, right. We're cats. But one of the things I think that is challenging is that back in the 70s, when things were a little bit more rigid societally and a little bit more linear, there was the concept of the midlife crisis. And for some people, it was a crisis, but that was probably more the extreme ends of the spectrum, right? But at least there was the cultural ideas of the divorce and the marrying the young secretary and buying the sports car and all of these things, the facelift and all of these grasping for youth things. So if you weren't on the edge of the spectrum, if you were somewhere closer to the middle, but you were starting to have these weird feelings and thoughts, and because our parents and grandparents had these feelings too, they just didn't have as much of an outlet for them as we do.
Yeah.
You at least had some sense that, oh, this must be my version of the midlife crisis, right? You at least had something to attach to that explained what was going on with you. And I think now the millennials are, I know this anecdotally, the millennials do not like the term midlife, do not resonate with the term midlife, and certainly do not resonate with the concept of a midlife crisis. And so my whole goal is to make it common cultural knowledge that there is this transition that we go through, but how do we do that and not attach it to the concept of a crisis? How do we get their attention to tell them this transition is coming? And if you're like Stephanie and you ignore it and stick your head in the ground, it's going to be messy. Or you're going to make some messes.
Right.
There are better ways to do it. Talk a little bit
I
about midlife crisis.
Sure. Midlife crisis isn't a crisis, it's a transition.
Right.
And we keep using that word crisis, which who would want that? Who would even want midlife if you think here comes a crisis?
Right.
But midlife is a transition period.
Yeah.
You are supposed to, just like puberty,
Yeah.
just like other times. Do we get through it? Yeah. But transition is what happens in midlife. That is the word that we should be using because we do it throughout our life. We're going to do it again in another decade. We're
Yeah.
going to do it again later in old age.
Mm-hmm.
And so we need to acknowledge that there's a point in time that we're going to be thinking differently.
Right.
So if you looked back at those midlife crisis things, those were people seeking fulfillment. That's
Yes.
what we're really seeking in midlife.
Right.
And that's the transition that we're moving toward is fulfillment. So when I am emptying my jar of knowledge, wisdom, culture, values, blah, 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 to somebody else, I'm saying I have something important to give to you. And then I'm looking for that person to take it who's going to say, this is just what I've been looking for.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like a crisis if you don't have anybody to give something to. So this whole idea of, you know what, I'm going to go get a red sports cart. Well, that's one way that you can feel fulfilled. It just doesn't last very long.
Right.
That's why when we go buy a new purse or new shoes or new something, we feel amazing when we get it and it wears off in a couple of weeks or a month or whatever. And then we need to go get more.
Right.
So that's the only outlet that people had for that. There was no one saying, oh, you're transitioning to more fulfillment. Let's get you involved in mentorship, volunteering, philanthropy. Let's get you involved in some way so that you can pass on your meaning to somebody else. They didn't have that. That
Yeah.
did not exist at all. I actually feel like that must have been really rough for them. Now, though, we have expectations that are out there for people to engage in midlife that will allow for that. Many different options.
Yeah.
So it's expected that in midlife, you should be giving some of your expertise to somebody. You get to choose to whom, to how, whatever,
Right.
all of that. But that's the difference. And I think that we're going to start moving to talking about those things which are positive and ditch the word crisis and see
Yeah.
doors opening rather than a hurdle in front of us.
Yeah. I'm wondering, so I've heard the term, and I know there's a book out there, but I know it's also been used elsewhere. You've mentioned the concept of adolescence, and there is a concept out there of middlescence, right? Midlife. But as you're talking, I'm wondering if we should just start calling it adult puberty.
Adult emotional puberty.
You have this blog on midlife and turning 40. And so I knew we were going to have some good stuff to talk about. But one of your most recent blog posts, talk about what if. Tell that story. The
Oh
story
my gosh.
of,
Yeah, this one just came out
yeah.
in Psychology Today. I was talking with Neil Cummins. He's a friend of mine, and he is an astrophysicist. He teaches at University of Maine, and he has 21 books out. I mean, he's so amazing. I'm always, wow. And he's so humble. It's unbelievable. But I said to him, I want to talk about your what if books because he started that whole genre of what if books.
Okay.
It started with his, I think he was 5, his son James, who said to him, he used to ask him what if questions all the time. And one time he said, what if there was no moon?
Mhm.
And as an astrophysicist, he said, I needed to start taking away all of the things that were there the world would look different if there wasn't a moon.
Right.
And he had to peel each one of those away and see what that was.
Yeah.
And so I said, ooh, that sounds like we could apply that to our lives.
Yeah.
So we applied the question, what if, to midlife. And it was fascinating to see how you can do that. You can put that whole, what if in midlife. And so we sort of peeled that onion back and realized that there's so much there that we can look at that gets exposed when we apply the whole what if to midlife.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize until talking to him how applicable You can look at things in outer space and things in our emotional lifespan that are all very similar. And if we just peel back some layers, we can get to the meat of what really is there and how our life would look like if we sort of took the what if approach.
Yeah, I love you wrote, what if we stopped fearing midlife and instead treated it like Cummins treats the cosmos, as a system worth questioning layer by layer with imagination and curiosity rather than angst? That just blew my socks off. I love it. I'm a what if girl anyway, so it's interesting to think about, what if I quit my job? What if
Yeah,
I changed positions in the company? What if I stopped hanging out with that friend who makes me feel weird and
exactly.
toxic? And what if I stopped eating dairy? I mean, it's so easy because
Yes.
the stakes are low. It's just
Exactly, and don't we love that when there's a nice low, like you said before, the tightrope is like inches off the ground?
yeah,
That puts it into those digestible nuggets that
yeah.
we can all, what if about most people, if you think about space, you're curious and you're excited, right? Ooh, what if I got to learn something?
Yeah.
Why not put that to ourselves? And like you said, what if I'm not hanging out with those toxic people all the time? That every time I go out, I'm like, wow, when is this going to end?
Yeah.
You don't have to hang out with them.
Yeah.
What if you got to go out with people you like instead?
Right.
What if you got to spend your time 8 hours of the day doing what you like?
Yeah.
What if you got to live where you want? What if you got a dog? What if?
Right.
That's fuel,
Yes.
which is how we made all those discoveries in space was by asking what if. He really inspired me to think a little bit differently with the what if, which
Yeah.
is kind of
And you've inspired me, and he's not far from me in New England, so I may reach out to him as well. But it's so neat because they're just little thought experiments. And if you were then to just, I know this doesn't work for the cosmos, but it works in our example, pay attention to how your body feels when you explore the answer.
yes, you're right about that.
Because that's going to give you information. What if I were to stop hanging out with those toxic friends who are always gossiping? Your body's going to give you a little feedback, and maybe it's a little bubble of, ooh, ooh.
And people don't talk about how good you feel when you subtract something bad
Mm,
in your life. And we often go through rote. Well, this is what I do. This is the person I hang out with. And you have all of this negative stuff around you that's not matching with how you want to feel.
yeah,
So what if you just ditch it?
yeah,
And I love the saying because I think that if you look back to when you were a kid, how many people have a friend that they had from elementary school? How many from middle school? We go through friends, and it's not like a bad thing that as you're going through a life stage, when you're in your 20s, you're built to have a whole lot of friends around you because you're figuring out who you are.
yeah,
Well, as we go through our stages, we evolve.
yeah,
And sometimes that means saying, you know what? I know that everybody told me I should be nice to everybody and that I say yes to everything and I say yes to everyone. Well, when you hit 40, that's when you're like, no, no,
right,
no. So if you do the what if I said no every now and then?
right.
Um,
What if I
that's
only said yes to the things that make me happy?
yes, exactly. Exactly. And you know what? People think that certain things are tied to negativity, like, well, I have to work. Okay, so say yes to the work you like. Figure out how that looks because if you start to peel that, what if I looked at how could I make myself feel good about my job? You're going to peel those layers off and you're going to find out what that core is
Yeah.
that you like about things. And then you just pursue that.
What if I was able to reduce my cost of living by getting rid of some of these luxuries so that I wasn't chained to this high paying job?
Yes, absolutely. So if we what ifed our way to amazing friends, fewer but more meaningful, what ifed our way to the work we like, what ifed our way to living where we want to live, we are going to be much happier. Honestly, you could go what if the whole day away, and it's kind of an exciting journey to go down, like just to sit by yourself for a few minutes and what if, even if you wrote out every day a what if
Yeah.
and dug down, you're on a journey with yourself. How fun is that?
Well, and it goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is this is about the emotional part.
Yes.
This is about the meaning and the fulfillment and the emotional part of what's going to make you happy, healthy, secure,
Yes.
safe, fulfilled, joyful. It's so cool. And it's really funny too to take, for me, this is taking back a phrase, because when I was in my 30s, I dated a guy for a long time, and he was a bit of a wildfire. He was a functioning alcoholic. There was all kinds of things. He worked in the entertainment industry, and he used to come to me and say, well, what if we moved to Orlando for this exhibit? Or what if I took a job on this tour when I was gone for 9 months? What if we moved to Chicago to work at this museum? And it used to give me these, whoa, like I would react emotionally and try to figure out, like, how am I going to change my life? And oh my God, what if I have to move away? But I finally got to the point where I called them his what if bombs. And I said, do not drop what
But
if
they were
bombs.
his.
They were
Yeah.
exactly right. And I was reacting to them for sure. But I finally was able to say,
Yeah.
don't talk to me until there's something real, until you've got a job offer, until we actually need to make any plans. But like, I'm not going to go on this emotional,
Yeah.
whirlwind.
You're making a really good point, which is your what if is yours, right? You
Yeah.
do not have to include everyone in your surroundings in your what if. It's really what if I, not what if we.
Right.
So you could say, I really looked at my life and here's what I want, right? And
Right.
the what if shouldn't be that I'm going to turn to my left and have a new goal immediately, turn to my right and have another goal immediately. It's really, you're looking for fulfillment.
Yeah.
And sometimes a rapid change can feel like a momentary fulfillment, just like when you buy a new handbag and you're like, look at me, I feel great right now,
Right.
or whatever.
Yeah.
But that wears off. So you're looking for a longer term fulfillment, is really what it is when you're looking at your what ifs.
Yeah.
But, when you're checking that out, you might find out, like you did, what his what ifs aren't matching my what ifs.
Right. Right. And
And
I
that,
don't need to be at the mercy of his what ifs.
no, nobody should be at the mercy of anyone's what ifs.
Yeah.
And most people aren't. Most people,
Yeah.
when you have friendships that are real friendships, right? Or if you're past the discovery stage with somebody in a relationship, you have something at your core that's got you together.
Yeah.
So you could bounce off and say, I'm having this thought about my work. What if?
Yeah.
Where you're not saying, ride this train with me.
Right.
Instead, what's your feedback about my thought about my own what if?
Right, right. I have explored this what if question, and here are some things I've thought of. What do you think
Yeah.
about them? Or knowing me, what's your feedback on them? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I love this reclamation for me of what if, and really just using it to look under the covers everywhere. It's like, look under the couch, look under the covers on the bed, look behind the pillows, like look and see what's there, because maybe there's some stuff that you haven't considered yet. Maybe there's even better.
Exactly. What if my life could be better in this area?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the emotional evolvement of us, this is a transition also. We always transition and evolve with our emotions. If you look back at your life, if you're frustrated, do you react the same way you did when you were 2? Most people don't. They don't throw themselves on the floor and grab the leg of the person next to them and
Mhm.
kick their feet. We evolve and transition to match where we are. And that's what we should be striving for, if you're using the what if or if you're doing whatever, but the inner looking at what you want. You should be able to say, I deserve this, I need this, I want this, and I'm going to go get it.
Yeah. Oh, Deborah, so much good stuff. So much fun. I think you and I could probably keep going for hours and hours, but
Yeah.
for the sake of the folks listening to us today, let's call it here and decide that maybe we'll do it again sometime.
I'd love that.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
if we did it again?
What if you were the first person I had on twice? I'm going to have to think about that. I love that idea. Deborah,
Yeah, or
thank you.
what if we collaborate on an article together sometime? That'd be fun.
Oh, let's what if together.
Exactly.
Deborah, thank you so much for joining me today. I've just so enjoyed our conversation. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. This was a great time.
Thanks so much for listening today. What I love most about this conversation is how Deborah reframed midlife from something to fear into something we grow into. Midlife gets a bad reputation, but as Deborah shows us, it's actually when things start getting really interesting. You have more clarity, more emotional intelligence, and more authority than you've ever had. So if something in your life feels off, pay attention. That nudge is information, and you get to decide what to do about it. If you feel tight, misaligned, or overdue for a shift, start by staying curious. Ask small questions, make small observations. You don't need to overhaul your entire life all at once. You just need to start listening to what your experience is trying to tell you. I hope this episode helps you feel a little less alone and a little bit more grounded as you move through your own version of this transition. All right, next time you are going to meet Andrea McGinty, who was so good at setting her friends up, she turned it into It's Just Lunch, a dating service that started in Chicago and grew to 110 locations and $90 million in sales. Then, in her 40s, her marriage to the man who had become her in-house legal counsel fell apart, and she sold her business. But she decided late 40s was too young to retire. So I hope you'll come back and hear about how this transition came to completion. I'll see you next time. The Big 4 podcast is produced and presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.